Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We are talking about the race for the White House tonight. President Biden says he's all in, but are Democrats firmly behind him? Plus, Project 2025. What's up with the Conservative Presidential Transition Project by the Heritage Foundation? Some say it'll roll the country back hundreds of years. Some say time has come. Well, we have two guests tonight who will help us delve into the weeds of both sides of this political coin. My guests are Dr. Michael Fauntroy, Associate Professor and Director of the Race, Politics, and Policy Center at George Mason University, and Republican strategist Raynard Jackson. Guys, thank you so much for joining the conversation. I appreciate it.
Good to be back with you, man.
Thank you.
So let's start with some of the news of the day. Of course, there was a meeting today of some Democratic leadership, and the word specifically from, for example, the Congressional Black Caucus is that they are still all in supporting President Biden. There are at least 9 members of the Democratic Party, members of the House, who have come out and said that it's time for Biden to quit the run for re-election and someone else step in. Dr. Fauntroy, I'll ask you your thoughts about this. First of all, that meeting today, Democrats, at least so far, seem to be kind of split on this issue.
Well, there's no question that they're split, and it's understandably so. You know, as bad as President Biden's debate performance was, and it was terrible, the truth is virtually every House Democrat views the alternative, a potential return to the White House of former President Trump, to be so problematic that many of them are in some ways sort of frozen in place. They like Biden. They think Biden's been a good president. There's some disagreements on the margins, but that's the way it is in politics. And they think that some of them think that he's being sort of unfairly treated. And of course, there are others who believe that, he should have only committed to one term from the very beginning, and that the Democratic Party has enough strength on its bench to provide a viable alternative. And I think we have about another week or so of this, but at some point we got to land on a decision and move forward. I think it's still 50-50. I think there's some really compelling arguments to move on, and I think there's some compelling arguments to stay. And I'll also point out, as it relates to the Congressional Black Caucus, there's something interesting happening in that many on the progressive left feel some sense of loyalty to President Biden that I think some might find interesting and unexpected, given some of the early battles that they had at the beginning of the president's term.
Yeah, well, we certainly did see, for example, the only Black governor, Wes Moore from Maryland, come out yesterday and say that he supports him. But, Raynard, what do you think are the dangers of President Biden should he decide not to continue the run for re-election? Is that problematic for the Republicans, and more specifically former President Trump, as he tries to get back to the White House?
Well, I think this is a boon for Republicans and Trump specifically. The best thing Trump can do is continue what he's done, staying quiet. I mean, when your enemy is in the process of destroying themselves, stop talking. Let them play this out. Originally, Trump was going to announce his VP over the past weekend. But because of this, he may take it all the way to the convention next week and make his announcement, because, Trump likes the theatrical and all that good stuff. And so, but with that, see, the problem, I think, on the Democratic side is with Biden stepping down on his own, which is the only way he can be removed because of the delegate count, by him picking Vice President Harris and saying during the campaign in 2020 that I will pick a Black female. Now he's boxed himself in. So if you're from the school within the Democratic Party that she's not ready to go to the next level, i.e. being president, how do you explain away to the Black female vote that you bypassed a sitting Black vice president, went with Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan? And so this is a no-win situation for the Democrats. Biden will not be the nominee. I think, Harold, last time I was on your show, I said as much, and a lot of folks laughed at me. Biden will not be at the top of the ticket. Now, by him stringing this out, the more he strings this out, the more damage to the Democrats going into the the general election.
Is he right, Dr. Fontroy? Do you think that this is problematic? Should he drop out?
It's only problematic if the Democrats pick the wrong person. And by that, I mean, Vice President Harris is the first option, in my view, and perhaps the only one. She has the infrastructure. She's been by the president's side and since 2021. And if she isn't the choice, then it's going to be very difficult for any other nominee to have any legitimacy with some of the constituencies that put President Biden across the finish line the last time, specifically Black women. And so I don't, I know there's a lot of talk about other potential candidates, but I'm not sure any of them could do better than Vice President Kamala Harris. And I do think that she presents, in terms of her background, her story, her experience, a very viable and capable candidate. And so, she has much more experience than Donald Trump did when Donald Trump ran. So I don't get what the pushback is about her, although I do understand, and this is really important, I do understand that for the last 4 years, Republicans have not just been running against Biden, they've been running against her too, because at some level, Republicans had thought all along that there was some sort of plan that eventually she was going to be the nominee. So throughout conservative media for the last 4 years, there have been as many attacks on her as there have been on him. And so her reputation is going to need some immediate rehab should she end up being the nominee.
But let's be really honest. This is America, okay? And whether you liked her or not every person votes policy. People vote for who they like. Not everyone is as politically savvy as the three people in this conversation right now. Not every person is hanging on every word of the experts, the pundits, the polls. If America was not willing to elect a white woman with all of the experience that Hillary Clinton had, what makes you think that they are prepared to elect a Black woman? Dr. Fontroy.
So Harold, I hear you on that. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. She's going to be faced with the same intense misogyny that Hillary Clinton faced, mixed in with the healthy dose of racism and anti-California stuff. So it's not going to be easy. There's no question about that. But I think there are a lot of Democrats out there that are so concerned about Donald Trump that those concerns that they may have about her would be pushed to the side. And I also think, and this is something that we sort of gotten lost in the last month or so, there are going to be these abortion questions on ballots across the country that are likely to drive more women to the polls. Now, 55% of white women voted for Donald Trump in 2020. So I'm not sitting here telling you that it's going to be a cakewalk in that regard. But I do think that issue is going to push more women to the polls that would vote for Kamala Harris than we would have seen 8 years ago with Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm. Renard?
No, well, I totally disagree with that. Number one, it's not so much that Kamala Harris. I thought she was a great senator from California when she came up here, leaving her post as Attorney General. She would grill the heck out of people who were before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I thought she was ready for prime time. But I think, Mike and Harold, when she went to the next level, launched her presidential campaign, and 3.5 years as VP, she reminds me of an athlete who showed you all the promise in the world on the collegiate level, went to the NBA, and had the wrong coach, i.e. Joe Biden, put her in a position where she lost her confidence. And on the level of vice president, she is nowhere near as competent as she was as a sitting U.S. senator. And she's never recovered from that. And that's why I think you see the unforced errors, the cackling, just the word salad. I don't think it has anything to do with her intellect, more so than I think she lost her mojo. Because remember, when she became vice president, Biden put her in charge of the border, and she didn't want that, and she never dealt with that issue. So everything she touched on the policy side has gone to heck in a handbasket, and now she's supposed to be the pit bull for abortion. Now, abortion is important for women in general, but when you look at the issues facing the country now, the economy, illegal immigration, crime, unemployment, abortion doesn't even come in the top 5 of those issues. So if the Biden campaign thinks that's running on abortion and calling Trump a convicted criminal, those 2 issues are already baked in to how you view Trump. And if that's the Democrat strategy, I'm going to the White House now and measure the drapes.
Okay, how about that? Well, and you did mention, crime, Raynard. According to FBI statistics, crime is down, and so. But is that about the numbers say one thing? But is that a perception? Is that about perception?
Interesting you say that, Harold. Here's my response to you and others when they throw out the statistics to me. There are I think, 12 men on the NBA basketball team. And when you start throwing out these statistics, that's the equivalent of saying every play, the NBA average in points scored is 15 points league-wide. But then when you're the 12th man on the Washington Wizards, you've not scored a point the whole season, you're still credited as being part of the average of scoring 15 points a game in the NBA. So but when you start looking at crime in Baltimore, St. Louis, New York, Chicago, those statistics then have a totally different meaning behind them.
Okay. Listen, I've got to take a break, but when we come back, I want to drill down more on this Joe Biden and age thing, a very, very important issue, as well as the report of a doctor who has been to the White House to take a look at Joe Biden regarding Parkinson. We've got a lot to talk about, so please stay with us. The Daily Drum will continue on Sirius XM channel 141, and don't forget, you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Inside segment via podcast on WHUR.com. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our discussion about presidential politics and the race to the White House. My guests are Dr. Michael Fauntroy, Associate Professor and Director of the Race, Politics, and Policy Center at George Mason University, and Raynard Jackson, Republican strategist. Okay, so before the break, I was talking about the age thing and Joe Biden. I want to play for you something that we heard from California Congresswoman Maxine Waters at the Global Black Economic Forum. This was happening at Essence Fest. Now, she brushed off criticism that Biden is too old, and she also had some choice words about Donald Trump.
We're now at a point in time where people are talking about Biden is too old. Hell, I'm older than Biden. Yes, Lord. And I get up every morning. All right. And I exercise. All right. And I work late hours. All right. I take care of Black people. All right. Trump has told you who he is. He defined himself. He is a no good, deplorable, lying, despicable human being. He's talking about if he doesn't win, there's going to be a bloodbath. There's going to be violence. There's going to be a civil war. Who the hell do you think he's coming after? Who's going to be targeted? Who is he talking about? But you know he means business because he is the one that led the invasion of the Capitol January 6th. Now, we have to talk about the difference between these two. Now, I want to tell you, no matter what anybody says, it ain't going to be no other Democratic candidate. It's going to be Biden, and we better know it.
Okay. So, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, very, very vocal about her support for President Biden. Dr. Fauntroy, your thoughts about what she said. I think this kind of goes back to the point you were making earlier about some of the higher profile Black elected officials on the Hill and their support for President Biden.
So this is part of a much larger conversation. You know, I've been teaching undergrads and graduate students for the better part of 20 years. And I will tell you, in the last decade or so, I've noticed a real shift among my students. They are, generally speaking, mortified at the age of our national leaders. Okay. Whether it's president, vice president, senators, Supreme Court justices, members of the House of Representatives, that's sort of generally speaking. And when they hear the numbers, it just doesn't compute to them in many ways. They don't understand why everybody over the age of 50 isn't just going off and sitting down in a corner somewhere. That's sort of their view on things. Now, as it pertains to Representative Maxine Waters, I think part of what she's trying to do is keep people focused on something that I think gets lost in all this talk about age. And that is, what have been the policy choices that have been made under his administration, and how are those different from those that were made during the previous administration? And at some point, it becomes about policy and not just theatrics. So you were talking earlier about the neurologist visiting the White House. Yeah. Well, it turns out that there are close to 1,000 servicemen and women and White House staffers and cabinet secretaries who are seen by physicians in the White House physician's office. That office is not just for the president and the vice president. And for some of those military officers, they are treated and seen regularly by a neurologist in terms of for examinations. President Biden had a neurological exam at every one of his annual physicals. And it turns out that in February of this year, the report for the most recent physical was released, as had all the previous ones during his presidency, and laid out all of the detail regarding his physical and mental condition. And so this information has been available. And the report that was done by the physician said that there was no sign of neurological decline that is outside the norm or anything that really needed to be worried about. So I think what you're seeing and hearing from some of these members of Congress, particularly older ones, okay, regardless of whether they're in the CBC or otherwise, they're also speaking up for themselves because they know when they run for re-election, somebody's going to say, so-and-so is too old to be in that seat. So it's not just about defending President Biden. It's also about defending themselves.
But let me ask you this before I go to Reynard, because neurologists in there to see not just President Biden, but also other members of the staff. The reality is the only person we care about is President Biden.
Right.
And we don't know those other members of the staff. Number one, the issue also was the defensiveness that Karine Jean-Pierre had
Yep.
during that press conference yesterday.
Yeah.
Because if everything that you're saying is true, Dr. Fontroy, then she would have said what you said, number one, and there wouldn't have been the apparent defensiveness. Number
Yeah.
one.
Look,
And-
she didn't do a great job yesterday.
No, she didn't.
And the physician who did the initial report released a memo yesterday that provided the detail that I just laid out. And I think for privacy reasons, she didn't want to say it at the time, but it's now public information. And those 8 visits to the White House were not for him, they were for other people. And so people can make their own judgments. Unfortunately, the communication cycle, it doesn't work very well right now. And I think if people had this information in the White House press corps beforehand, they perhaps would not have been banging the drum like they were.
Yeah. And the other thing is, you mentioned privacy reasons, whether it's Biden or Trump or Clinton or Bush 1, Bush 2. I mean, doesn't
Presidents have less privacy.
That's my
Presidents have
point.
less privacy.
That's my point.
Now,
and it looks
now,
like
of course,
Biden
we
is
don't
following
know.
the Trump playbook.
We never got any information out of the Trump White House
Right,
regarding this health,
exactly.
and except for Ronnie Jackson, who stood up and said a bunch of words about how healthy President Trump was. We didn't have anything in writing. So we've gotten more transparency out of this White House than we did previous ones. And having said all that, I do also stipulate that they could be handling this much better than they are.
Yeah. Renard?
Well, Mike, listen, you should be press secretary for the president. I mean, you did a wonderful job, better than John Pierre, that's for sure. But one of the things that they didn't tell you, this Parkinson specialist in those 8 visits, he went to the president's personal doctor. He didn't go, they're the general medical facility for the staff that you're talking about, Michael. But then there's another office underneath the residence of the White House, where the president's personal physician has his own staff, separate from what you're talking about. This Parkinson specialist went to see the president at his private office right beneath the family residence. So that would lead one to believe that he was in consultation with the president's personal physician about some issue. What is to be determined? It's going to come out. But Jean-Pierre, if she's horrible. Matter of fact, the reason they brought John Kirby over, they were going to fire her 2 years ago. They had so much blowback from the homosexual community because she's a big time radical liberal homosexual person that they decided to split the time with John Kirby and her. She got really pissed about it, but she's going to go down as the worst press secretary in presidential history. She is totally not up for the job there. And so, but for her to inject security as the reason that she couldn't go into detail when the media...
You mean privacy.
Privacy, yeah, right, privacy. When they got the information through a FOIA request that's public information as far as the White House law, that's why people thinking there's more to it. It could be an innocent explanation, but him and hawing the way she did yesterday, she's leading one to believe in the conspiracy theories.
Hey, Reynard, I think you meant Sean Spicer when you said worst press secretary.
He was the worst dressed, but I mean,
Yeah, well,
come on, Mike.
Yeah, Judge, and one could argue that unfortunately,
And Kayleigh McEnany.
yeah,
We got a bunch of them over there on your side, man.
yeah, and we could also say that unfortunately, it wasn't Sean Spicer's fault.
Well, that's true.
So,
They're only as good as your client.
yeah. Well, there you go. I do want to, and I just want to ask, you, Dr. Fontroy, do you believe that? Let's, if we could just take the politics out. No, we can't do that. But let's try to take the politics out for a moment. Based on his age, his performance at the debate, do you think that Joe Biden should step down and somebody else should go in? Whether it's a Kamala Harris, perhaps a Gavin Newsom, who knows, Wes Moore.
Sherrod Brown of Ohio is somebody
Yeah.
I think you got to think about. So I'm evolving on this, but I think this is where I am right now. To your earlier point, most voters don't care at all about policy. They're just focusing on what makes them feel good and
Yep.
if there's a
Who do
tax.
you like?
You
Yeah.
know, we vote for president and members of Congress and that kind of stuff the same way we do the high school homecoming king and queen. You know, it's often a popularity contest. And right now, President Biden has some significant problems. I think the debate performance is notable, but if you understand how presidents make decisions on a daily basis, you know that what you saw in a debate isn't necessarily the way it works on a day-to-day basis. So for me, this is now about history and legacy. And that is, President Biden, in my view, has been a pretty good president, and in some ways is going to be underrated for some of the things that he's done. So the question becomes, in 10 years, do you want to be remembered for being underrated and pretty good as president, or do you want to be remembered as a guy who who hung on too long and opened the door for Donald Trump to return? Is he Ali against Larry Holmes, right? Is he Willie Mays at the end of his career running around in center field for the New York Mets, right? Or do you want to move out now and give the party a chance to find somebody who can win and continue your work? So for me, it's legacy. And for that reason, I think he's got to step aside.
Interesting. I want to talk about some other things that are coming up, because this is going to be another big stage week.
Harold, can I interject quickly?
Yeah, please. Go right ahead.
Mike, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts. Here's the problem I'm having with Black folks on this situation with President Biden, and more specifically, the Congressional Black Caucus. Let's just admit, Biden is in a weakened state right now. The Black Caucus has been for decades the largest voting bloc in the Congress for decades. Here, Mike, is an opportunity for the CBC to extract a pound of flesh on policy, whether it's DC statehood, whether it's more funding for HBC, whatever the issue is. If you're going to stand with Biden right now in the midst of this turmoil, where is the thinking people among the CBC to say privately? Of course, they wouldn't have a press conference, but privately, because I've talked with some members this morning after their meeting call last night. Why is there no negotiation saying, Mr. President, we're getting a lot of heat from my constituents, but I'm going to stand with you. Oh, by the way, we need this, we need that on a policy issue that's specifically relevant to the Black community. I don't want to hear a rising tide lifts all boat or all people will benefit, but what is a specific policy initiative they can extract that's specific to the Black community?
Well, I don't know that those conversations haven't taken place. Now, the CBC, like a lot of other factions within Congress, is split. You know, the CBC of 2024 is not the same as the CBC of 1984, for example, where you have so many members of the CBC that represent non-majority Black constituencies. So they're going to traffic a little differently than those who, like Maxine Waters, for example, or like Jasmine Crockett, or some of these other members who represent rock solid Black districts. They may look at it very differently. And so I don't know. What I do know is that President Biden, again, has done a number of things that haven't gotten the airplay that they have been, because we've been more focused on whether he walks slowly or, you know, all this other stuff.
When you say we, Mike, who you tell? Because there's nobody that got a bigger platform than the sitting president of the United States. You got a huge megaphone.
So I hear you on that. And when the president speaks on something, that issue immediately becomes legitimized. I'm not disputing that. But we're in a really different media landscape. We're in a much different communications landscape. I bet you that if you look back over the course of I'd be willing to bet you that if you look back over the course of the last year and you add up all of the airtime devoted to Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, it might be more Trump than Biden, and Trump isn't even the current president. And so
I would agree with that.
yeah.
I would
And so
absolutely
I just think that, we're in a period of transition in terms of our communications, our public discourse, our politics, all of that. And so I think that some of the previous things that you and I have come, sort of cut our teeth on might not fit today's environment, which in my view is a real disappointment.
Yeah, but Mike, you will concede that Democrats in general, President Biden specifically, they got the megaphone, all the black stars, influencers, media influencers, Hollywood, celebrities, athletes, LeBron James. Can you imagine if LeBron James right now were to tweet out something positive about President Biden? That would have some cachet on the liberal side of the aisle.
I think you're giving way too much credit to celebrities, man.
Absolutely.
I just don't think.
But the White House
now I will say
has
this.
them
I
in
will
there.
say this, and I know we're about to pivot to Project 2025. What Taraji P. Henson did on the BET Awards the other day, that kind of stuff can get people's attention. But I think a lot of this other stuff is just sidebar. It's white noise. I just think that most people aren't focused on this generally. And I don't know that a lot of people are going to take a lot of their cues from celebrities. Now, having said all that, if Taylor Swift came out tomorrow rocking a Joe Biden T-shirt, we might be having a different conversation.
Yeah, I think that point is exceptionally well made. I think that in the the Taylor Swift analogy, or with, for example, Oprah Winfrey in supporting Barack Obama, where you had some people, black, white, and particularly even white women who were maybe independent, who hung on Oprah's every word, absolutely loved her. Yeah, at least gave consideration. And
he was new.
Right, and it was very, very new. But I would say, whether it's no shade to King LeBron James,
the greatest of all time.
Well, yeah, I'm not a basketball fan, so I don't want to even get into that. But whether it's LeBron James or Michael Jordan or whomever, I just don't believe that there are people that are going to be really influenced. I just don't think that they carry the kind of weight. But
why did the White House always have them up in there?
Because certainly that's part of the process. You're always going to have that. You're always going to have those kinds of, but I just don't think that those people are really, really paying attention, to the politics. I don't know. Go ahead, Dr.
I was just going to say quickly, here's the answer. Because it's better to keep them with you or neutral than to have them oppose you, which is what's going to happen if you don't do the Breakfast Club and some of these other big podcasts that are popular in certain segments of the Black community. You do them just to check the box, just to make sure that people can't criticize you for not doing them. You're not moving a whole lot of votes. What you're doing is being present.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great point. Great point.
Yeah. Let's talk about this Project 2025 by the Heritage Foundation. Some 922 pages, a conservative manifesto, if I may, for changing the power structure that presidents would have going forward. Now, with that said, we could do an entire show on that. There are just so many things that Project 2025 talks about, including, for example, kind of consolidating power under the executive branch, including, the DOJ, that some people would consider that to be unconstitutional. Former President Trump was distancing himself from Project 2025, saying he doesn't know these people, doesn't know where this comes from, when the lion's share of the people who have contributed to this, and I looked at the PDF on this, many of these people work for the White House, and many of them are household names as it relates to working in the previous Trump administration. I don't even know what to say about this, Reynard, including their talk about Christian nationalism in all of this. Some of this stuff is frightening. And as I said, the former president is now distancing himself from the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. Your thoughts about this?
Well, good, Harold. I tell you what, I've known you for several decades now, and I'm about to throw you a scoop that you will eternally owe me from death do we part.
Oh, you mean more than the last time I owed you?
Exactly. Oh,
Okay.
this
So
is
just
no
add it to,
steroids
put
here.
it on your tab. Just put it on the tab.
Right. It's like a typical Democrat. But no, I've been advising Project 2025. And here's what I would love to do if you're open to it, Harold. I would love to do a whole show with you and my buddy that is the director for Project 2025, as well as possibly getting the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts. Let's do a whole show and let's drill down on Project 2025 where we got time to explore it. And then we'll come on a second time if you want to have somebody from the other side that we can have an engaged, enlightened discourse back and forth. But I think the media has done such a horrible job in talking about 2025. The one area within Project 2025 I'm focused on, this is a clearinghouse. So if you want to be a presidential appointee, if Trump wins in November, as far as what we call Schedule C job, which is mid-management, that's appointed by the president. Some are Senate confirmed, some aren't. Or if you want to be on a board or a commission through a presidential appointment, we're taking resumes. So if I know, for example, Harold, you go on their site, submit your background, you call me offline, I can go pull your resume. So during the transition, if I know you're interested in a certain area or a certain board or commission, I can physically walk through the process and put you in a better position to get. That's what Project 2025 is about, as well as policy positions for this Department of State, Treasury, Commerce, Homeland Security, all those things. And so I don't know what the media has been reading because I was involved in that whole process. There's nothing scary about Project 2025, and the Heritage Foundation has been involved in presidential transition since Ronald Reagan, as far as submitting policy prescriptions. So let's do the show.
So
all right. So I'd have to think about the show piece. But first of all, this is not Ronald Reagan's Republican Party. Let's be really clear. Okay. Number one. Number two, and we don't have enough time right now, but where this Project 2025, as I said, talks about an authoritarian Christian nationalist plan to move the U.S. toward an autocracy, getting rid of the Department of Education. We could talk about so many things. Getting rid of the Department of Homeland Security. Have we forgotten 9/11? We could go on and on and on and on. This kind of issue that would attack the LGBTQ community, would cut back on civil liberties and civil rights for people of color. I mean, I could go on, and so that may not be scary for the GOP. That is no longer the big tent that John McCain, God rest his soul, was talking about. This is a whole new transformation, Dr. Fauntleroy.
So I'm glad Reynard mentioned President Reagan, because this is not new. Project 2025 could, in an earlier iteration, have been Project 1980, because that's where the Heritage Foundation sort of cut their teeth and became a national player in this regard. When President Reagan was inaugurated, he walked into the White House with briefing papers written by the Heritage Foundation on all kinds of public policy questions that led to the advancement of conservative policy positions. So this is just a more extreme version of that, right? And because that would have never mentioned, 1980, it would have never mentioned Christian nationalism. Now, they may have danced around a little bit and talked about traditional family values and that kind of thing, right? But these are code words that we've understood for 40 plus years. But when you look at some of the policy prescriptions, as you pointed out, Harold, there are some things in there that we need to be focused on, and one of which deals with elections. And I just think that when you look at their prescription and how they want to utilize federal election law to prosecute crimes or perceived crimes, if you look at it carefully, there's not a lot to miss. That what they want to do is what they did during the Reagan years, which is de-emphasize the prosecution of civil rights violations and make it easier to restrict access to voting, and changing voting rules in ways that will make Project 2025 a successful conservative public policy prescriptions. If you're into conservative public policy prescriptions, as Reynard is, then Project 2025 is great, and it's not scary at all. But for those of us who've been paying attention to the intersection of theory and practice in public policy, I think there's a lot to be worried about. I think it's really important for people to look at policies and not get caught up in personalities, because when that happens, then we overlook some of the really important things that are confronting us as a people.
And let me just say, when you're talking about the prosecution of civil rights violations, particularly as it relates to things that could extend to criminal, we talk about that case that just was adjudicated earlier this year in Mississippi, where you had sheriff's deputies and a police officer attacking Black men because they were dating Black women. And that, I mean, this is 2024. That kind of thing, the torture and the threatening of Black men, because of who they were dating, they were dating outside of their race, sounds more like 1924. And there was not, as we know, in 1924, there wasn't the power of the federal government to look into these kinds of things. And until there was that, the kind of eradication of those kinds of things, that one snippet of Project 2025 is going to be scary for those people who would be impacted for those kinds of crimes, Reynard. And Reynard, I've got about 1 minute. I'm going to let you have the last word. I will say, of course, that this is going to be a big week for President Biden. The White House is saying that he's got a big schedule, everything is fine, and that he's in good health. I'll let you wrap it up with whatever you want.
Well, yeah, I think President Biden dead man walking. It's not a matter if he steps down, just a matter when. And as I stated earlier, the longer he drags the inevitable out, the more damage he's doing to the general election after their convention next month. And but Harold, I strongly encourage you to let me bring my folks on to talk about Project 2025. I think your audience would probably appreciate just hearing directly from the horse's mouth. And then, like I said, if you want us to come back on a secondary visit to have people like Michael Fontroy on to kind of drill us down and have a spirited conversation, let's do that. But I think we need to bring this to the fore in the Black community and spend time talking about what is in there and what isn't, and what the purpose of all this is. But it has no racial overtones, no authoritarian twist to it whatsoever. It's just good policy from a conservative perspective.
I will think about it. That much I will say. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your participation in this important conversation. We will be in touch. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, July 9th. I'm Harold Fisher.